All right, so get this. We've got a case that's about to get a major shakeup.
Oh, yeah.
The Menendez brothers, remember them?
Of course.
They're up for resentencing.
Wow.
And we are diving deep into what has brought us to this point.
Okay.
We've got court documents, news reports, even that recent Netflix series everyone's buzzing about.
Right.
Ready to unpack all of this?
Absolutely. And you know what's really interesting about this case?
What's that?
It's been a roller coaster from the start back in 1989.
Oh, wow.
Imagine this, a seemingly perfect Beverly Hills family, the Menendez family living in a mansion,
Okay.
and then boom, the parents, Jose and Kitty, are found murdered.
Brutally.
Brutally.
Hold on, brutally.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not talking just any homicide here, right?
You're telling me the crime scene was something out of a nightmare, even for seasoned investigators.
Wow.
Multiple shotgun blasts, way more than what's typically seen in a crime of passion.
Oh, wow.
And the sheer violence of it pointed to something really dark.
Okay, so we've got this shocking crime scene.
Yep.
And then enter the sons, Lyle and Erik, claiming they were out for the night and came home to this horror show. Lyle even makes this frantic 911 call, sobbing and all.
Right?
But something wasn't adding up, right?
Exactly. Investigators were initially looking at the possibility of a mob hit,
Oh, really?
especially given Jose's business dealings.
Interesting.
But then there's the brothers' behavior after the murders.
Okay.
They go on this crazy spending spree. Rolex watches a Porsche, fancy trips almost $700,000 in just a few months.
Wow.
That doesn't exactly scream grieving sons, does it?
It's like they hit the lottery,
Yeah.
which, well, I guess in a twisted way they did.
Right.
But how did the truth finally come out? Was
Yeah.
it the spending that tipped everyone off?
It was a piece of the puzzle for sure.
Okay.
But what really blew the case wide open was a confession.
Oh, wow.
Erik confided in his friend Craig Signorelli.
Uh-huh.
And gets us back in high school, they co-wrote a screenplay called Friends.
Okay.
The plot: a son murders his wealthy parents to inherit their fortune.
Spooky.
Right.
Whoa, talk about foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Is that the screenplay that eventually became the movie Natural Born Killers? Because that was a wild ride.
Not quite, but I see where you're going with that.
Yeah.
The similarities are definitely chilling,
Uh-huh.
but it doesn't stop there.
Oh, no.
Lyle went back to their home from college, and guess what?
What?
He allegedly erased his father's updated will from the family computer.
Oh, my gosh.
Then there's Erik's confession to his therapist, Jerome Oziel.
Right.
This is where it gets really messy, because it was actually Oziel's mistress who went to the police revealing everything.
You're kidding?
Nope.
Talk about a breach of confidentiality.
Yeah.
Wait, so the therapist mistress is the one who broke the case.
Yes.
You can't make this stuff up.
I know, right?
So with these confessions and all these strange coincidences piling up, the Menendez brothers are arrested.
Yeah.
What happens next?
Well, the case goes to trial, and it becomes this massive media spectacle. The brothers' defense was explosive. They claimed years of horrific abuse at the hands of their parents,
Oh, wow.
both sexual and physical, which ultimately led them to fear for their lives.
So they're arguing self-defense.
Basically.
Basically saying they had to kill their parents to survive.
Yeah.
That's a heavy claim to make.
It is.
Did they have any proof to back it up?
That's where things get really complicated.
Okay.
Lyle claimed the abuse he endured stopped in childhood,
Uh-huh.
while Erik said it continued into adulthood.
Hmm.
Their defense team painted this disturbing picture of Jose as a controlling, abusive pedophile,
Oh, my.
and Kitty as an enabler struggling with addiction.
Hold on. If Jose was abusing Lyle in his childhood,
Yeah.
how would that lead to them both killing both parents years later?
Right.
Doesn't that seem a bit far-fetched?
You're right to question that. The prosecution definitely zeroed in on those inconsistencies.
Yeah.
They argued that the abuse claims were completely fabricated, a desperate attempt to avoid a murder conviction.
I can see how that would be a tough sell to the jury.
Yeah.
I mean, on one hand, you've got these horrific allegations of abuse, and on the other, you've got this brutal double murder.
Right.
How did the jury even begin to sort through all of that?
Well, the first trial in 1993 resulted in a hung jury,
A mistrial.
a mistrial.
Yeah. It was a fascinating split, actually.
How so?
The female jurors leaned toward a manslaughter conviction,
Really?
potentially swayed by the abuse allegations,
Ah.
while the male jurors were more inclined toward first-degree murder, focusing on the premeditation and brutality of the killings.
Oh, so even the jury couldn't agree on what justice looked like in this case.
Yep.
It really speaks to the complexities of the whole thing.
Yeah.
But a mistrial means they had to do it All over again, right?
That's right.
What was different the second time around?
The second trial, held in 1995, was definitely less of a media frenzy.
Okay.
They had stricter rules about cameras in the courtroom.
I see.
But even without the constant spotlight, the stakes were just as high. And this time they had new evidence, right?
Yes.
You mentioned Lyle's ex-fiancée earlier.
That's right. She testified that Lyle had actually tried to bribe her to lie about Jose making sexual advances towards her.
Oh, wow.
It cast a serious shadow over the brothers' credibility,
Yeah.
especially considering their previous lies about their alibi and the spending spree.
It sounds like the prosecution was building a strong case against them.
Uh-huh.
But I'm guessing the defense still stuck with the abuse narrative?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Erik even took the stand and gave this incredibly emotional testimony about the alleged abuse.
But the prosecution was ready for them, right?
They pointed out inconsistencies in his story,
Okay.
highlighted the lack of any physical evidence to support the claims of sexual abuse,
Right.
and really drove home the point that the level of violence in the murders didn't match up with the self-defense scenario.
You mentioned earlier that the brothers purchased shotguns before the murders. Did the prosecution bring that up?
They did, and it was a key part of their argument for premeditation. They also played a recording of Lyle's chilling 911 call,
Right.
highlighting how calm and collected he sounded, despite claiming to have just discovered his parents' bodies.
Oh, gosh.
The prosecution argued that it was all an act,
Wow.
carefully crafted to mislead the police.
That's so creepy.
I know.
I remember reading about that 911 call. It's almost like he was playing a role.
Yeah.
Did the defense try to explain that away?
They argued that Lyle was in shock, but the prosecution countered that true shock wouldn't allow for such a calculated performance. They also brought up a letter Lyle allegedly wrote to a friend, basically coaching him on how to provide false testimony.
Oh, my goodness.
It painted a picture of the brothers as master manipulators, willing to do anything to avoid responsibility.
So with all this new evidence and the prosecution really hammering on the inconsistencies in their story, what was the verdict in the second trial?
This time the jury was unanimous guilty on all counts of first-degree murder.
Wow.
Both Lyle and Erik Menendez were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
So if they were already sentenced to life without parole, why are we talking about a resentencing hearing now?
Right.
What's changed after all these years?
Here's where it gets really interesting, and this is why we're doing this deep dive now.
Okay.
You see, in 2017, Roy Rossello, a former member of the popular boy band Menudo, came forward with the shocking accusation.
Menudo?
Yeah.
As in that 80s pop group.
That's the one.
Ricky Martin was in Menudo, right?
He was.
Wow. Okay, so now we have this entirely new layer to the story. Decades after the murders.
Yeah.
It completely reframes those abuse allegations made by Lyle and Erik, doesn't it?
It does.
What happened next? Did anyone take Rosello's claims seriously?
Well, it wasn't just a random accusation.
Okay.
A letter written by Erik to his cousin back in 1988 surfaced. And in it, he actually mentions abuse.
Really?
Potentially corroborating Rosello's claims.
So this added a whole new dimension to the case.
It did.
Suggesting that the Menendez household might have been even more toxic and abusive than anyone initially realized?
Exactly.
That's a game changer.
For sure.
So are we saying that the Menendez brothers might actually have been telling the truth about the abuse all along?
It's not that simple.
Okay.
While Rosello's accusation and Erik's letter lend some credibility to their claims, there's still a lot of debate surrounding the nature and extent of the alleged abuse.
Right.
Remember, there was never any physical evidence to support the claims of sexual abuse.
Yeah.
And the brothers' stories have been riddled with inconsistencies from the beginning.
So where does this leave us now?
Well,
I know you mentioned a resentencing hearing.
right.
What's happening with that?
The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office has been reviewing the case in light of this new evidence. And a hearing is scheduled to determine whether the brothers deserve a reduced sentence.
I can imagine.
It's a very complex situation.
What are the arguments on each side?
Well, on one side, you have family members who believe that Lyle and Erik have served their time and shown genuine remorse for their actions.
Oh.
They argue that the abuse they suffered, now seemingly corroborated by Rosello's accusation, should be considered a mitigating factor in their sentencing.
Interesting.
They believe the brothers deserve a chance at a life outside of prison, a chance at redemption.
That's certainly a compelling argument.
Right.
What about the other side? What are their reasons for keeping the Menendez brothers behind bars? On the other side, you've got people who believe that no matter what, the murders were just too brutal.
Yeah.
Too calculated to justify a reduced sentence.
Right.
They're saying that justice demands accountability for such a heinous crime, and that releasing the Menendez brothers would set a dangerous precedent.
Yeah.
Basically minimizing the gravity of their actions.
It's a tough one.
I can see both sides of it, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's one of those cases that really gets you thinking about the purpose of punishment.
Really does.
Is it about retribution,
Right.
rehabilitation, or
No.
something else entirely?
That's exactly the question at the heart of this resentencing hearing. It makes us deal with some really uncomfortable truths about family, abuse,
Right.
and the limits of our justice system.
You said it. It's almost like a Greek tragedy, isn't it?
It is.
You've got wealth, privilege, violence, betrayal,
Yeah.
and now this bombshell accusation against the father years after his death.
Crazy.
It's a story that just keeps evolving.
It really does. And I think that's partly why this case is still so fascinating to us.
I agree.
It really challenges our assumptions about good and evil, victim and perpetrator. And it begs the question, what is justice?
Right.
Can we separate this horrible act from the complex circumstances that led to it?
What about public opinion?
Yeah,
I know that Netflix series sparked a ton of conversation.
it did.
Has it changed how people view the Menendez brothers?
It has, and that's another really fascinating part of this whole thing.
Yeah.
That series, which came out last year, portrays the brothers more as victims of trauma than cold-blooded killers. And it's led some people to sympathize with them, see them as products of a deeply dysfunctional and abusive environment.
You know, it makes me think about how much our understanding of trauma and abuse has changed since the 90s.
For sure.
Back then, it wasn't something that was widely discussed,
Right.
especially in cases like this involving wealthy, seemingly perfect families.
Absolutely, you're right.
Yeah.
I think we've come a long way in recognizing the signs of abuse and understanding its lasting impact on people.
But the question remains,
What's that?
does that understanding change how we view the crime?
Right. Even if the abuse was real, does it justify murder?
That's a tough question with no easy answers.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's a question that the judge will have to grapple with when deciding whether or not to reduce the Menendez brothers' sentence.
The weight of that decision is enormous.
I bet.
It's not just about two men who committed a terrible crime.
Right.
It's about what message we're sending about accountability, justice, and our values as a society.
So what do you think will happen?
Oh, man.
What's your prediction for the resentencing?
Honestly, it's anybody's guess.
Yeah.
The judge has a lot to consider.
Mm-hmm.
The new evidence, how the brothers have behaved in prison,
Right.
the arguments from both sides, and, of course, how the public views the case, which has clearly shifted over the years.
It's a lot to think about, that's for sure.
Yeah,
But even without a crystal ball, I think this deep dive has been super insightful.
I agree.
We've really explored the facts, the complexities, and the questions that remain about this case.
And now I think the biggest takeaway here is that this isn't a story with a neat ending.
Right.
It's a story that forces us to confront some really uncomfortable truths about ourselves, our families, and the very nature of justice.
So as we wait for the judge's decision, I want to leave you all with this. What do you think is a just outcome?
Yeah,
Where do you land on all of this?
good question.
It's a question worth thinking about.
It is.
And we encourage you to check out the sources we've linked and come to your own conclusion.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Absolutely.
Until next time.